I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
So last time, what did we talk about? We went through the chapter line by line, and for some lines, we picked out key characters and analyzed those. So as a reminder, we were able to divide up the chapter into 4 parts, 4 sections. The first section consists of only 2 lines. Section 2 is the expansion of line 1. Section 3 is the expansion of line 2. So let me talk about that for just a quick moment, just to remind everyone. Line 1 is about favor and disgrace make one fearful. So that translation corresponds closely to the actual characters. First character there is all about favorable words, like praise, encouragement. And the second character there is about unfavorable words, that is dishonor, criticism. And then third character is similar to or as if. And then the last character, shock and dismay, fear. So those 4 characters we see again in line 3. Line 3 starts with 2 characters that basically mean, what do you mean by? What is this? What is called? And then the same 4 characters that we see in line 1. So all of that line 1 is connected to lines 3 to 7. So in a similar way, it's going to be line 2 being connected to lines below as well. Line 2 talks about the greatest fortune being the self. The self in this case is not body. This character in modern Mandarin means body, but here it means the self as in being selfish, being egotistic, being concerned with only the self. So then in section number 3, in the third section, it starts out with the same 2 characters that you saw in line 3, and then repeating the 5 characters from line 2. So that is the connection. Line 2 goes into more details from line 8 to line 12. What do you mean by the greatest misfortune is the self? What does it mean? What is it? Why is it called that? And then it goes into explanation. So we went through the meaning of the lines very specifically. And today I want to make sure that we are able to apply the lessons to life. So last time, when we got to the end of that section about gaining and losing, praise and criticism, there were some reflections that you can take as sort of a general practical advice. So before we get there, I want to just point out a couple of things where it says, if attachments can manifest in getting favor, losing favor, getting low marks, and losing low marks, that's disfavor, unfavorable words, then how would a Tao cultivator handle them in life? So attachments can manifest in all different variations of getting and losing both praise and criticism. So the getting part that I highlighted in red here corresponds to the first character of line 5. Losing, which I also highlighted in red, They both correspond to the first character of line 6. So, what is the practical advice that we talked about previously? Just as a reminder for everyone, there were multiple points being made, starting with this. How do we handle attachments? Well, we can handle attachments better if our focus is not on the end results, good or bad reviews, scores, quota, but on the process itself. So typically when people become attached, they usually are very attached to the outcome, to where things are gonna be when it's all said and done. Rather than to do it that way, that's the typical approach. Tao cultivators will be focusing on doing a good job regardless of the end results. So the focus is different, redirected, intentionally redirected. Number 2, we emulate nature and continuously improve the process in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So what I said previously was that we look around in nature, we see flow everywhere. We see the flow of water in the form of rivers and streams and creeks, and that's probably the most obvious example. But there is also the flow of air currents, and that's the wind. There's the flow of energy. There's the flow of emotions, thoughts, creativity, ideas, the flow of ideas. So all of these things should suggest to us that flow is part and parcel, intrinsically part of nature. And therefore, it is what we focus on. It is what we focus on when we attempt to improve things. So rather than to aim at the eventual results of the flow, we improve the flow itself. Number 3, this is important. When we know that we have done our best, in terms of improvements, instead of going with the flow, improving the flow, focusing on that instead of the end result, we've done our best. That's when we can truly relax, because literally there wasn't any other thing that you could have done. You've done it. So detach, let the chips fall where they may. Whatever the results are, whatever the outcomes happen to be, it's all right. Everything's fine. So that, you might have thought, was the practical advice from the Tao. Well, it's actually just the beginning. There's a lot more that I want to cover with everyone today. But there was also another slide with similar conclusions, practical advice, things that we can use that was also general in nature, and that comes at the end of the other section, this time about the ego. So let me show you what I mean. So that section comes to an end in line 12. Line 12 asks, what misfortune do I have? So previously, we went through character by character to explain how the original Chinese can be translated into modern English. Then, what we want to do is to apply this Tao to everyday living. And what is the Tao? This is the Tao. When I free myself from the ego, I stop worrying too much about external opinions. As a result, favor and disgrace both lose their power over me. So specifically, let's talk about favor and disgrace individually. By favor, I mean good, positive words. I mean like praise. So this is something that many of us, myself included, are very vulnerable to. That is, when people express a good opinion of you, some sort of praise, it's easy to lose your head. It's easy to let your head swell up. With the guidance of the Tao, though, praise will no longer blind me and make my head too big. So instead of being blinded, I simply acknowledge the compliment and I express gratitude. So a better way to handle praise. So what about the flip side? What about criticisms? Criticisms no longer crush me and send me into a deep depression. Instead, I see them as learning opportunities. So this was also a general everyday advice. This is what I would like to dig into very deeply today, using examples to really make it stick. Now, before we get to the examples, there is a phrase that I would like to share with you. So when we talk about criticisms, one of the things that we all have to realize is that depending on what you do, the greater the work that you have accomplished, the more likely it is that you will attract attention, even though your intention may not be to attract attention in the first place. So attention comes whether you want it or not, as a natural side effect of you living in the Tao of excellence. So when you have a higher profile, you can expect greater and more frequent criticisms. So there is a modern Mandarin expression, 4 characters, it's a set phrase. In Mandarin, we call this 成语. It's a set expression. And set expressions are usually 4 characters. So let me explain what this is. First of all, the pronunciation, 树大招风. So this is the pinyin. It's mostly pretty close. 树大招风. So the feng at the very end, it's more like F-U-N-G or F-O-N-G, somewhere in between. But the official pinyin is F-E-N-G. So what do the characters mean? Here's what they mean. First character means tree. Second character means big. The third character is beckons, or to invite, to attract, to get. And then the last character, feng, is wind. So if you are familiar with feng shui, it's actually the same character. Feng means wind. Okay, great. So what does this mean? A rough translation is big trees get more wind. So if you think about this, it's very similar, not exactly the same, but it's very similar to when we say the nail that sticks out is the one that gets hammered down. Of course, in that particular saying, in our shared North American English-oriented culture, in that particular saying, a nail that sticks out and gets hammered down no longer sticks out. But in this Eastern formulation of a similar idea, the big tree that catches wind, while it's continuing on to catch more wind, it doesn't get hammered down, but it has to go through more. It has to be tested more. So that's what the expression actually means. So is there like another way to talk about this? Well, sure. You don't need to focus on just trees. You can apply this idea to multiple aspects of life. So this is what happens when you get criticized. This is what leads up to it. So the meaning is that when you have a higher profile, you become a more visible target. What we will sometimes say, you have a target painted on your back, or you are a big target. And sometimes becoming a big target just means that it's one of the consequences or side effects of you having done the work that you were meant to do. So higher profile, more visible target, just like a big tree is subjected to greater wind, much more so than small tree. So there's, as I am looking around in this, North American cultural landscape, I find another expression that is similar to it, that expresses the same idea, but perhaps from an unexpected source. Let me go over that with you before we take our mid-meeting break. So here it is. And I wonder if you guys recognize this. Hopefully you do. This is from one of the recent blockbuster, action Avengers movies. This is Avengers: Age of Ultron. So these superheroes have gained a very high profile. So in the language of the Tao, we would say that they've become a pretty big tree, a very big tree that's catching a lot of wind. So one of the superheroes, this character's name is Vision. I think probably most people have seen this movie, but in case they haven't, this character is talking about the rise of supervillains, in effect. So along with superheroes, there come the supervillains. So what Vision says is our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict, and conflict breeds catastrophe. So think about how that has actually a Tao-like flavor. We're also saying that when you get to be a big tree, you will attract more wind, like challenges. And that can cause issues. Wind, in this case, will be the winds of criticism. So that is going to cause conflicts, either you getting very upset, very angry at the criticism, or clashing with someone else, perhaps the critics. Now, if that is not managed, if that is not controlled, if that is allowed to get out of control, then in your personal life, you will end up with disasters, calamities, catastrophes, problems, misery. So similar idea. And now you know what it means when we say 树大招风. Okay, so the key point that we're talking about now is relating the ego to criticism. The more ego one has, the harder a time one will have in dealing with criticisms of all kinds. So this is the basic idea. Now, the Tao Te Ching goes further and talks about how it's not just criticism, it's also praise, because your attachments will make you grasp onto it and you are fearful of letting it go. Definitely. So to explore all that, and specifically the effect that the ego has on the handling of criticism, I would like to use a story to illustrate the point. The name of the story is 100 Frogs. So here's a story that I would like to share with you. Once upon a time in ancient China, there was a scholar who took, a lot of pride in his work. He was a literary figure, and he considered himself to be the leading literary figure in his literary field. Because of that, one day he was shocked to discover that there was criticism against him. He came across some criticism. It totally rocked his world. Now, initially, when it was just a first criticism that he encountered, he was able to just like brush it off. But then another critic surfaced, and then another. After a while, it seemed as if everyone in the world disliked his work. So this negativity affected him greatly, had a big impact on his state of mind. He found himself thinking about it all the time, feeling so angry that it started to get in the way of his peace of mind. So finally, he decided, I can't handle this anymore. I need to take some time off. So the scholar decided to travel to a distant mountain inn. He was planning that he could stay there for a week. So when he arrived, the innkeeper welcomed him and took him to the guest lodge. So the scholar was pleased to discover that his room was simple but comfortable, and as a bonus, it has a very nice view of a beautiful pond right outside his window. So he stayed there for the first night, and then the next morning, he got up early. He joined the innkeeper for breakfast. When the innkeeper saw him, he noticed that the scholar had bags under his eyes, appeared to be tired, and without a whole lot of energy. So the host, the innkeeper, asked, "Sir, did you have a good night's sleep?" The scholar shook his head. No, I had a tough time falling asleep. There's got to be 100 frogs in the pond right outside my window. I gotta tell you, they carried on croaking the entire night, all night long. I couldn't sleep. The innkeeper was sympathetic. He said, I am sorry to hear that. Many guests tell us they find the sounds of nature, including the frogs, to be soothing and relaxing, like the opposite of your experience. So the scholar complained that, yeah, to me, it was just the opposite. And he said, it's kind of ironic, because I came here specifically to find peace and quiet. How am I going to do that with all this noise from 100 frogs? That kind of defeats the purpose, right? So the innkeeper thought about this and said, how about if we set out some traps to catch the frogs? We can do that today, and then we can move the frogs to a nearby lake. That way, they won't be around tonight to disturb your sleep. The scholar was frankly quite skeptical. He said, Sir, there are far too many frogs in the pond. I don't think you can catch all of them. However, the innkeeper seemed pretty confident. He said, worry not, sir. We will catch as many as possible. So that night, the scholar thought there might be like a slight reduction in the noise, in the croaking noise from, fewer frogs than before. But much to his surprise, he heard no croaking at all. Zero croaking, complete silence. He was finally able to get the rest that he felt he badly needed. So he got up the next morning feeling refreshed, feeling energetic. He could not wait to thank the innkeeper at the breakfast table. He asked, "How were you able to catch so many frogs? I thought for sure that you would not be able to catch them all. That must have taken a lot of work." The innkeeper said, "Sir, you give us too much credit. There were only 3 frogs, so it did not take much time or effort." "What?" the scholar said. 3 frogs? He could not believe it. He said, that can't be right. I heard many, many more than 3 frogs. Like I told you, it sounded like 100 frogs. The innkeeper smiled and said, "That was the result of your mind magnifying the sounds made by a few. It really was just 3 frogs, but your agitated mind multiplied them until they seemed much, much greater in number. So at the end of the day, it's nothing more than an illusion. And the moment you see through this illusion, the 100 frogs vanish. They disappear into thin air, and they become only a few frogs. And as few frogs, they no longer have the power to rob you of your peace of mind." So that's the end of the story of 100 frogs. Now, let me challenge everyone with the question that I think you are probably expecting. The story really wasn't about frogs. What was it about? And I'll wait a bit for your answer as I advance to the next slide. Yeah, Tim, you are absolutely correct. What are the elements of the story? Let's run through them. The frogs weren't really frogs. Things are never exactly as they seem in a Tao story. So the frogs were representing or standing in for the scholar's critics. What else? The croaking of the frogs that robbed the scholar of peace of mind? That was the criticism. So what about the 100 frogs? Well, that's what the scholar imagined was the legion of critics out there all against him. So I think the story then begins to make more sense. Not really talking about the frogs at all. So it's a very practical thing for us to be talking about handling criticism because, let's face it, we're all going to encounter criticism. I get plenty of criticism from every direction. Probably you too. And this is what makes the real Tao, the authentic Tao teachings, different from what I often see out there. Why do I say that? Well, a lot of people assume that Tao teachings about, the yin and yang, the formless essence, mysterious void, and other esoteric subjects. So in a way, they're right. The Tao is about those things. In fact, in the chapter after this one, chapter 14, we will be talking about the formless essence. But that's not the only thing that the Tao is about. The Tao has a very real emphasis, oftentimes overlooked in the West, and the emphasis is on the practical art of living one's life among people and interacting with them skillfully. That's what this is, handling criticism is about interacting with people skillfully. Some of the people are going to be praising you. Some of the people are going to be criticizing you. So the skill in handling criticism becomes a very pragmatic, important consideration. Now, to start with, we know that we don't like being criticized. So we develop different ways to deal with criticism. So that's my next question for everyone. How do people deal with criticism? I don't mean you, I mean people in general. So I'm getting some really good insights. Thank you, Francis. Being self-conscious about criticism that can affect the ego if you desire to be valued as someone superior, or letting go of trying to control everything that affects us. And yes, Tim, you are correct. Oftentimes, people deal with criticism by pushing back, like, I refuse to accept this, this is not valid, or you are wrong. You, my critics, you are wrong. Or point the finger somewhere else. You're right, Alberto. Make up an excuse. Blame it on something else. Someone else or something else. Point the finger. Ignore, deny, accept what can change. Go on the attack. Absolutely, Carolyn. You are perfectly right. So I want to meld all of those things together into like a spectrum of extremes. So one end of the extreme is to disregard criticism, ignore or dismiss negative feedback, like, nah, they don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea. I am too far above them. They don't understand me. They do not understand my genius. So that's one way to deal with criticism. That's one extreme. The other end is, why can't I make this right? Why am I always messing up? So the other end of the extreme is to take it to heart so much that you let yourself be crushed by negative feedback. So in the Tao, we always talk about how the extremes are bad and moderation is the better place to be. So let's talk about what are the problems that can occur at the extreme ends of the spectrum. What happens potentially when you ignore or dismiss negative feedback? Well, one problem is that you miss out on any opportunities to learn from perspectives other than your own, because you're saying, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They're idiots. Their criticism of my genius is unfounded and invalid. So what about the potential issue of the other end, letting yourself be crushed by negative feedback? Well, that's it. You're letting yourself be crushed by negative feedback. That's a pretty bad consequence there. That's a problem right there. So we can say it in this way. You keep dwelling on them. And that's a problem, because when you continue to dwell on negative feedback, oh, I messed up. Oh, I really did it this time. Boy, that was awful. If you keep dwelling on it, you will do so beyond the point of learning anything useful from the negative feedback. So these are the issues. And if you think about chapter 13, well, that's exactly what it said. Remember, chapter 13 said, favor is high, disgrace is low. Having it makes one fearful. Losing it makes one fearful. So in just a few lines, Lao Tzu provides this penetrating description of how we worry too much about external feedback. When we're disgraced by criticism, we're concerned about the loss of social status and position. Now, the flip side is that when we're favored by praise, we're just as concerned. We're concerned about holding on to the positive support and not let it slip away. So when you are that way, being concerned about praise as well as criticism, it is as if you're constantly living in fear. Now, of course, I know there's always going to be people who say, well, I don't care what people think. So in my life experience, I find that the people who say the most loudly that they don't care, they oftentimes turn out to be the ones who care the most. So the solution in chapter 13 of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says that you have to realize this fear, this concern, it's coming from the ego self, the egocentric self. And what he wrote was that the reason I have great misfortune is that I have the self. If I have no self, what misfortune do I have? So this ego, this element of the mind that magnifies the significance of both praise and criticism is what the scholar experienced in the story. The magnifying effect distorts your perception. So the perception of the critics, who may be few but become magnified until they become 100 frogs. That is the meaning of the phrase, 100 frogs. So the critical remarks from these critics are like the croaking of the frogs, as I mentioned, and they can seem so loud that you cannot hear anything else. They become overwhelming. So what we have to do, as Lao Tzu says, is to not have the self, which is another way to say you have to let go of the inflated ego. That will give you the clarity to see the frogs as they truly are, which, means not as many as you thought initially, like 100 frogs, and certainly not enough to justify losing sleep. So for the scholar, this realization liberated him to see through the illusion. For all of us, that same realization will liberate us from apprehension and fear. So we can see that, there's just no need to obsess over praise or criticism, favor or disgrace. It's just not necessary. So that is the clarity that you need to deal with your frogs appropriately. You've got frogs. I've got frogs. You recognize the possibility that, sometimes there's going to be valid reasons behind the negative feedback. Because you are not driven to distraction by the magnified croaking, you can explore the possibility, of the valid reasons, so you can learn from those. So like the scholar, learn something new about yourself, something that will turn an upsetting experience into uplifting experience. That is, turn criticisms into creativity in solving yourself, your problems, improving yourself to the next level. Okay. So let's go ahead and sum it up. I think the point has been made effectively by the story. Let's go ahead and summarize. So before you receive criticism, so remember, 树大招风. The big tree catches more wind. So it means that you want to minimize your exposure. So this is why Dao cultivators will not flaunt or boast. No bragging. Keep a low profile, no flaunting, no boasting. So the idea is that before criticisms hit, there are actually things you can do to minimize the possibility of receiving criticism. Lower your profile. Try not to be that big tree, although sometimes it's unavoidable. So you can minimize by not being egocentric, hogging the spotlight, demanding recognition. So all of those are reasonable strategies. What about after criticism? That is to say, well, even though you kept a low profile, inevitably you still encounter, come across, receive, get criticism. What then? And some of it is going to be very unfair. Some of it are clearly just personal attacks. What then? How do you handle the anger? Well, some suggestions. First, like the scholar, refrain from blowing it out of proportion. So when I say that, what I meant is like, imagining 3 frogs is 100 frogs. So you got to pull back from that extreme perception that costs the peace of mind. And then you can realistically deal with what the actual criticism is. So realize that because of the ego, the magnifying effect of the ego, the number of frogs is probably not as many as it seems at first. So that's the point that I'm making here. Then, what about the unfair attacks? Yes, attacks can come from any direction. Some of it is going to be quite valid, but there's also going to be ones that even upon dispassionate, logical, careful analysis, you discover that, well, frankly, it's people are just criticizing for the sake of criticizing, and there's nothing there. There's nothing to learn there. That's going to happen. There's going to be good criticism, constructive. There's also going to be destructive criticism. That is, critical remarks that are designed to take you down, and that's it. Not to learn, not to inform, not to improve, but to drag you down through the mud. That's going to happen too. So what you can do when that happens is to transform any anger into something that's more useful. If you are just seething in anger, that's not going to do anything positive for you in life. But that emotional energy of anger is actually very powerful. It can fuel a lot of constructive work for you. How do we do that? Well, that's the Tao of alchemy. That's the transformation of baser instincts, not baser metal like lead, into something valuable, precious metal like gold, which spiritually means noble goals, aspirations, positive feelings, love, fun, adventure, and so on. So there are 2 specific ways to do that. You can transform anger using a variety of different ways, but the 2 that I recommend, number 1, I wrote cultivation here. What I mean is a sense of mission. A sense of mission motivates you like nothing else, and it causes criticisms to fall by the wayside. Things that might have angered you before, if you're on a mission, there's something you got to do. You're not even going to think a second thought about these criticisms. It's like, people criticizing, but you're on a mission. You've got a sense of purpose. You know what you got to do. You're going forward. So when the criticisms come, it's more like, yeah, whatever. Thank you. I appreciate that. Whatever. Okay, see ya. I got something to do. I got something to work on. So that's one way to transform anger into something useful. Another way is gratitude, feeling grateful for the things you already possess, feeling grateful for life itself, for having your mind to do with as you please to make things happen. So those of you who have read my books, you will find that this is a familiar idea. And if you haven't, it's definitely spoken of in one of my books. And there's, in fact, there's a story on specifically that, transforming negative emotions into something more constructive. The name of the story is called Grandpa's Greatest Secret. That particular story, just to make sure everyone knows what I'm talking about, it talks about a man who had a particularly bad temper. Like he was very diligent. He worked hard, but people all knew he had a tendency to clash with others. Get into a fight, get into an argument. They also knew he had a strange quirk. Whenever he got angry, he would go home and he would run around his house 3 times. So thanks to him being so diligent, he was able to build his wealth. And using his savings wisely, he expanded upon his house and he bought more land surrounding his property. What this meant was that over time, that expansion turned his modest beginning into a ranch. So he still got angry from time to time, and people would see him run around his ranch. And people became curious, and they asked him about it. Hey, you were just running around your ranch. What's that all about? He always shook his head, declining to explain. Nah, I was just running. So years passed, he became an old man. So by now, his ranch was one of the largest in the area. When he got mad, it would take him quite a while to run around its perimeter 3 times, but he still kept up the practice. From time to time, when he would get mad, he would run around his big ranch. It would take hours. So luckily, he didn't get mad as much as he used to when he was a much younger man. So one day, after another rigorous run, he sat down by a tree. He's panting and gasping after some running, and he's trying to catch his breath. His grandson went to sit with him. And the young boy asked, "Grandpa, what do you have to run around like that?" So for the old man, spending time with his grandson was his favorite thing to do. So he smiled and he said to his grandson, "Believe it or not, it's Grandpa's greatest secret." So like all little kids, the young boy is excited by thoughts of secrets. So the young boy is like, "Secret? What's the secret, Grandpa?" So the old man said, "Well, it's the best secret in the world. It's the secret for achieving success in life." So the young boy said, "Grandpa, you're already successful." "Achieving success? What are you talking about? People say you are the wealthiest man around, and everybody wants a big happy family like we have." So the old man said, "Yes, I have a lot of good things now, but I didn't have much as a young man. All I had was my temper. If you think about it, having a bad temper is having less than nothing because it causes problems. So I knew this, but I couldn't help it. And one day I was so mad after arguing with someone, I needed to walk it off. So the house is not like the ranch right now, so big. The house was really small. I didn't own any land back then, so I walked around the house, and before I realized it, I had gone around 3 times. So the grandson still didn't get it. The young boy is like, "And that made you successful, Grandpa?" No, not yet, the old man said. It was the beginning of success because I realized how small my house actually was, how little I had in life. It became pretty clear that anger was a luxury I could not afford. So, I didn't have time to be angry. And when I realized this, as soon as I thought of it, the anger was gone, just like that. In its place, I felt only motivation. I felt only a sense of mission, an eagerness to get going, to get working. So it's beginning to dawn on the young boy why this was useful to the grandpa. So he said, "So grandpa, you've been running around ever since?" And the old man said, "Yes, I was lucky to discover a way to channel my temper, to use my temper rather than to have it use me. Every time I got mad, I would go around my little piece of land and then return to work with a lot of motivation and no anger at all. And the exercise, all that running around, was good for my health, gave me a lot of energy. All of this together is the key to my success. That's why I call it my greatest secret." So the boy thought about this. There still seemed to be something not quite right. So the young boy said, "Grandpa, this was when you were young, right? So why do you still do it? The ranch is so big now, there's no way it can feel small when you go around 3 times. So your secret doesn't work anymore?" And the old man said, "Well, you're very smart, and you're right. The ranch is very big. Nowadays, as I am running around this big ranch, feeling how big it really is, taking a lot of time just to go around 3 times, it becomes clear to me just how much goodness I have in life. With all the blessings of wealth, of health, happy family, it's not possible to be mad at anybody. With all these blessings, are you kidding? As soon as I think about this, anger goes away. In its place, I feel only gratitude and appreciation." So you see, Grandpa's secret still works, but in a different way. So that's the story. That's the story from one of my books, and I hope that when you listen to that story, you see exactly what it's getting at, especially as it relates to the very last bullet point that you see in the slide right now. How do you transfer anger into something more useful? Well, motivation, sense of mission. What do you have to do? What is your destiny? What you got to do in life? Be in touch with that. The anger goes away. And the other way, gratitude for what you have, the blessings that already exist in your life. Anger cannot coexist in the presence of your gratitude and appreciation. So be in touch with it, the anger dissipates. So these are 2 great ways of practicing Taoist alchemy, not transforming metal, but transforming your emotional state. All right, let's move on. So to wrap up chapter 13, toward the very end, we have a line that says, "can be trusted with the world." So just as a reminder as to what this means from our discussion last time, I want to bring it up again. So we talked about how this particular chapter can be taken in a couple of different ways. It can be advice to a king. So that's the national scale. At that level, to be entrusted with the world means to rule as the emperor over all of China. That's not what I care about. I care more about you as the ruler of your life. And that's the last point. At the personal scale, to be entrusted with the world means taking charge of your life and destiny. So you can properly rule the empire that is your world. So, guys, this ends our discussion of chapter 13. We are now ready for the paraphrase. As before, the purpose of the paraphrase is to demonstrate complete understanding by expressing the original meaning in our own words. So let's take a look at what we need to paraphrase. We begin with the two key statements. Favor and disgrace make one fearful. The greatest misfortune is the self. So now you know by noting the structure of 13 that the entire structure of chapter 13 is based around the expansion of the first two lines. So paraphrasing the first two lines becomes important. We need to capture the essence of this entire chapter. Here's what I would like to offer. There is a saying that both favorable and unfavorable words cause fear because our biggest problem is the ego that reacts to these words. So the important point for me is that we need to make sure the paraphrase includes favorable and unfavorable. They cause concerns, they cause fear, anxiety. And the biggest problem, the problem for those concerns and fears, well, it's the ego that reacts to them. Then, the second section, we expand upon line 1 about favorable and unfavorable. So here's what I would like to offer. How can both favorable and unfavorable words cause fear? We think positive opinions are highly desirable, while negative opinions are to be avoided. We become so invested in them that gains and losses, whether positive or negative, become very big deals to us. We worry about them all the time, before and after judgment. That is why we say both favorable and unfavorable words cause fear. So in particular, this is why I have a slide that says, before criticism and after criticism, what happens when you want to minimize criticism and what happens when you receive criticism anyway. That's because of the fear, the big deal, the worries before and after judgment. Then in the third section, we now have to expand upon line 2. The greatest misfortune is the self. So here's what I would like to offer as our paraphrase. How is it that our biggest problem is the ego? Well, think about the troubles we get into when the ego is out of control. When we receive criticism, we feel shock and anger because it is painful. When we receive praise, we feel unsure and even more anxious because we want more so badly. These issues all go away when we dial down the sense of self-importance. That is why we say our biggest problem is the ego. So I think, it's interesting for me personally that when we paraphrase the ancient text into modern language, there's because we use modern language all the time, all day long, there's a intimacy that invites clarity. So when we say the original in modern English, somehow there's an extra clarity of perception that comes in. Okay, so let's tackle the last section there. So what we want to do is to bring it all together in terms of the world, as in your world, your purpose, your meaning, your destiny. So here's what I would like to offer. Therefore, the greatest rulers are the ones who can transcend the ego. Instead of being concerned about themselves, They feel only concern for the greater good. Similarly, the greatest individuals are the ones who love something greater than themselves, the family, the team, or community. They are the ones who can truly take charge of their own destiny. So hopefully the takeaway for all of us is that if you elevate your thinking beyond yourself to care for something greater than yourself, then that, I would suggest, is the gateway to greatness. In this summary today, I want to cover both 13 and 14 because we talked about both. And introspection, because these are the questions that I would like to suggest that you ask yourself, that we can all turn the gaze within and review the past. So for 13, a callback on the story that you heard today. Question, do you, like the scholar, also have a tendency to hear more frogs than are actually out there? If criticism makes you fly off the handle like it does me, then that just means we still have a whole lot of work to do with the ego. Second question. This is also about criticism, but it's about what happens before criticisms come in. This is about assuming a lower profile. Can you let go of the need for attention and assume a low profile? That is, can you refrain from bragging, flaunting, talking about yourself, hogging the spotlight, etc.? I know it can be a challenge. You know, as human beings, we're all social animals. We all, to some extent, crave some attention. So, is that a need that you can let go, knowing what that need can cause, i.e., attachments? Third question, can you transform the emotional energy of anger into something more constructive? This calls back to the story of Grandpa's greatest secret. So remember, Grandpa became very successful because he was able to transform negative emotional energy into a sense of mission, a sense of purpose. Like, hey guys, there's still a lot more that I need to do in life. Please, out of my way. So those are the questions that I want to pose as summary for 13. For 14, we haven't gone into it very much. We've only talked about the formless essence of the Tao, the colorless, the soundless, the formless. So here's the question. Are you able to see the Tao as formless? Not as a thing or a personified deity, but more like a concept or principle. So these are the questions that I would like to ask everyone to consider, and I will see everyone again in a week.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架深鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，斜班一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.